The idea of a difficult, boss rush focused game is a relatively new concept, the likes of Shadow of the Colossus or the indie darling Titan Souls. However, there is a brand new one called Furi available for the PlayStation 4. But does this game have the right kind of difficulty and the right kind of bosses to really quench that gaming thirst? Or does it just end up falling flat? Furi is one of those games that prides itself on its difficulty. Right away you'll notice that the game is key in being able to dodge, learn enemy boss patterns, and be able to get in there at just the right moment to deliver a hit. You're going to have to absolutely be a master of these controls if you're going to be able to move on and get to see some of the later bosses in the game. The game's story, without going into too much spoiler territory, has you playing as an unknown prisoner who's trying to break out. You're free at the very beginning, and your goal is to fight the wardens, or the keepers of these prison realms, as you're making your way through. Each area you go to has a new warden or boss for you to fight, and once you defeat them, you'll move on to the next one. In between, there's some walking segments to move the story along and give you some more of the key details, but it's just a segment where you're going to be going from A to B with no other enemies other than the boss for you to tangle with. When you start the game up, you'll be able to, of course, choose your difficulty, and there are 3 difficulties, but the hardest difficulty of the game, Furier mode, is locked, and you have to complete the Fury mode in order to unlock it, which works as the game's normal difficulty. The easy mode, or promenade mode, is, well, just that. A lot easier with more health and less health on the actual bosses, with even less patterns for you to learn and master. Though the game even kind of berates you for even choosing this difficulty, and you won't be able to unlock the other modes, or even unlock trophies by playing the game on the easy setting. When it comes to the combat for the bosses themselves, it actually combines some elements of both hack and slash as well as twin stick shooters. You can move your character around with the left stick and actually fire with the right one, doing charged up blast by holding in the R2 button. But then you also have your normal slash attack that you can actually hit enemies with or charge up for a more powerful attack. The other key buttons, the ones you'll probably be pressing more often than not, are the block button as well as the dodge button. You have to get used to dodging at those right moments and being able to get around the enemy fire and attacks if you're going to be able to stand any chance of actually defeating any of the bosses. In fact, just the tutorial boss can give you a good run for your money. Besides figuring out the boss patterns and dodging at those key moments, depleting the enemy's health is actually quite difficult. Each enemy's health is represented by not only a health bar, but broken up into individual squares as well, showing you how many bars of health the boss has. And it doesn't work like a typical beat-em-up game where you drain one and it instantly goes to the next. In fact, going from one bar to another, you may change up the patterns that the boss has, and the farther you make it in, the harder that the boss ends up becoming. At any point, if you run out of health on your current health bar while you're still fighting with the boss ends up getting its health all the way back for that current health bar. Yours will then go on to the next health bar as well, so you're both starting off at the beginning of that current segment of the boss battle. So if you end up working a boss's health down to just a smidge left, but they end up beating you, that boss will gain all that health back and you'll have to start from the beginning of that current part. This ends up leading to marathon-like boss fights. On the easy difficulty, they have far less health and far less patterns to learn, but on those harder difficulties, the Fury, the normal default difficulty, this ends up leading to boss fights that have 4, 5, or 6 health bars and 6 different types of patterns for you to learn and master in order to actually make it through the fight. Furi presents you with a large amount of bosses for you to fight, each one being different from one another. You'll have all kinds of different setups and different patterns for you to learn. Some will be in more open environments, other ones will have pits in their environment for you to dodge, and even one in particular you'll have to battle on a more 2D plane. You'll also have to fight more or less bosses depending upon what difficulty you select, as well as certain choices you have to make throughout the course of the gameplay. Besides the overall cool bosses and some great designs, the game also has a really good soundtrack. There's a lot of synthesizer that's used, and it has a lot of pretty neon colors that you see throughout the course of the various areas that you travel to. The graphical styling and character design is reminiscent of El Shaddai or even the Afro Samurai anime. That music that ends up hitting during certain key parts, especially when you're moving from one area to the next, which overall is honestly a bit boring, but gives you a nice little break to your hands in between each of the very intense boss fights. That music is really good, and especially some of the ones at the end of the game are some of the best, and I highly recommend checking out the soundtrack as a minimum, even if you don't end up playing this game. Well-designed bosses and a great soundtrack are one thing, but where the game ended up falling flat for me ended up being with the actual controls. This is a game that you need precision controls, with button presses that go exactly and do exactly what you expect them to at the right moments, because you have very little windows sometimes in order to counter and actually be able to attack the game's bosses. I hate the fact that you're unable to actually change the control scheme at all. The game actually doesn't feature all that many different button inputs, and some buttons aren't even used at all. So just the feature of being able to select or change some things up a little bit, I understand maybe not with the left and right stick for the firing and the moving. However, it would have been great to be able to either use the D-pad as an alternative or be able to move the dodging or attack buttons to the L1 or R1 buttons, as that would have just felt a bit more natural in my hands. Some gamers, of course, aren't going to have an issue with this control scheme, so it may just be me, but giving me the option definitely would have been nice, especially with so many buttons going unused in the game. While overall I enjoyed the graphical presentation of Furi, I have to say that there was some technical issues with some freezing lag as well as just some slowdown. Not all the time, but there was definitely some noticeable moments, actually more so in cutscenes and in between the boss fights and during, which definitely is a plus, but still any kind of slowdown whatsoever just doesn't feel like it should be happening in a game like this. Furi is one of those games that's difficult, it knows it's difficult, it tells you it's difficult, and at any given moment it can go from being not just hard, but to plain unfair at points. While I did have those minor issues with the controls, especially some moments when dodging just did not feel like it was working correctly or was delayed from my initial button presses. Besides that, overall the difficulty I felt very challenging, but not overly challenging to the point of making me throw my controller, though there was a bit of rage here and there throughout. If you're somebody who doesn't like those really intensely hard games that know it is and are trying to force that hard difficulty on you at all times, you're probably going to want to avoid Furi, but if you're someone that loves that kind of challenge, Furi may be a game that you want to give a look. In order to complete the game's normal difficulty, it took me around 4.5 hours in order to defeat every boss. There's even an extra boss at the end, depending upon which ending that you end up getting. And, of course, this time that it takes you to complete the game will be lesser or shorter, depending upon how easily you grasp the controls and are able to kind of master the enemy patterns. In the end, I liked the boss designs and the soundtrack. The action, challenging, punishing, and unfair at times was overall relatively balanced. There is the multiple difficulties and other modes for you to unlock and play through, but there are some technical issues with the game, as well as not being able to change the controls definitely would have helped my experience overall. I also didn't like in the battles in particular that were very much more focused on the bullet hell style of shooter with the twin sticks, you ended up having the same colored bullets as some of the enemy fire, which ended up just getting confusing. Any expert of bullet hell games know that you usually try to keep your fire and enemy fire different colors so that you can end up paying easier attention to overall details. The game is available on the PlayStation 4 and on PC via Steam for $24.99, which I think is a bit hefty for what you end up getting here. With all that said though, I'm going to be giving Furi a 5 out of 10. It just missed out on being a 6, and there is definitely some things I really overall enjoy with the game. If you're someone who not only likes boss rushes, but likes those games that are sometimes unfair for the sake of being unfair, you're probably going to have some good moments with Furi overall. But anyway guys, that's going to wrap up this review. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.